What's going on, everyone? It's Ben from YGO from Zero, back with a new haircut and a new deck list for Android format. And today we're covering a bit of a fan favorite jank deck, Water. Now, this deck in some capacity has been featured on the channel before, albeit not with me playing it. I did lose a game to it in one of my Beast Spellcaster videos, so you can check that out if you're interested. But this is my first time piloting the deck, and I know the comments are going to roast me for my particular build, tell me to do other things as opposed to what I've got here, but I do have a reasoning behind how I built this deck, so let me explain it before you jump down my throat. Now, I say I have a reasoning, but I'm not claiming that this is optimized by any means, or that this is the one direction you can go with Water. There are a couple different ways to go, but the way I conceptualize the reason to play this deck is to make late game pushes with things like Aqua Spirit and Catapult Turtle, as well as having some recursive aspects through things like Revival Jam. To this end, we're playing 3 Mother Grizzly instead of our typical 3 Mystic Tomato, which can bring out both Revival Jam and Catapult Turtle. Now, ending on Revival Jam is kind of nice if you're in a Tomato versus Grizzly war, as most decks aren't playing a Dark Monster with 1500 attack, so you can just bring out Revival Jam immediately and cut off that war from going to fruition. And in addition, if you want to wall up for the next turn on the last Mother Grizzly summon, you can bring out a Catapult Turtle if they don't have another monster to attack with, and this can be pretty good at walling up, as well as potentially providing a damage push with its tribute effect. The Aqua Spirits are free special summons, which can be really great once you've loaded up your graveyard with a couple waters, and also can act as like pseudo removal in a way. It's not perfect as it just switches an opponent's monster to defense mode, but if your opponent doesn't have another beater, then it can be pretty decent. In a way, it can also operate kind of as a Bazoo out, just like Kaiku is, as Kaiku takes a couple turns to actually clear Bazoo, just like Aqua Spirit does. So it's pretty decent in that regard as well. But the main reason I like it is it's a free special summon, which can be very powerful in this format. Since we are playing so many water monsters, and we are trying to go for like big late game pushes, we do have 2 Umirukas in the deck. I think this is easily the weakest part of the water strategy, but it is okay if you could manage to pull it off. If you're able to set this up and your opponent doesn't have spell and trap removal, then you can buff up pretty much all your water monsters to be outs to both Gemini Elf and Kaiku the Ghost Destroyer, which is pretty good. The deck does have some issues dealing with Bazoo, so maybe actually I should have played a 3rd Kaiku instead of a 3rd Gemini Elf. But the way I conceptualized playing only 2 Kaiku was that the Aqua Spirits are also outs to Bazoo, and you really do want the Gemini Elf to clear your opponent's Kaikus, so that way you can bring out your Aqua Spirits of your own. The rest of the deck is pretty straightforward. We've got 1 Bazoo in here, as deck space is kind of tight here, and you don't want to have to banish all your water monsters, as you do want those for later to bring out Aqua Spirit. We've got a Cyber Jar to act as removal, a Morphing Jar to hopefully draw us into things like Umiruka, a Jinzo, because this card is insane. We've got a Magician of Faith to recycle our power spells, as well as our Umirukas if our opponent does get rid of them, and a Sangan and a Witch to search up pretty much anything from our deck. The spells are pretty straightforward as well. Change of Heart, Confiscation, Dark Hole, Delinquent Duo, Monster Reborn, Painful Choice, Pot of Greed, Raigeki, Snatch Steal, and Forceful Sentry, all incredibly strong. We're playing 3 Mystical Space Typhoon, another spell and trap removal's choice, as Heavy Storm doesn't quite play nicely with Umiruka, but we do have the Heavy Storms in the side deck. We're playing 2 Umirukas because you don't want to necessarily brick on this card, but you also do want to see it to buff up your water monsters. Again, as I mentioned, I think this is probably the worst part of the water deck and the least consistent. And you may see why that is in the game that I'm going to show, but it is a classic part of this sort of strategy, so I figured I'd show it off here. Then for the trap lineup, we've got 1 Call of the Haunted, 1 Imperial Order, 1 Mirror Force, and 3 Torrential Tribute. You'll note that we're not playing Jars of Greed or Skull Lair. The Jars of Greed are out of the deck because we just don't have the deck space for them really, and the Skull Lair is out for a similar reason that I cut down on the Bazoos, because it does somewhat conflict with our Aqua Spirits potentially. For the side deck, we have a Bazoo and a Kaiku in case we need to get more aggressive, a Penguin Knight for Empty Jar, 3 Giant Red Sea Snake if we want to side into this for more water beaters that can pair with Umiruka. We've got 2 Fishers in case we need more removal, 2 Heavy Storms, and 2 Dust Tornadoes in case we're up against a more back row focused deck, 2 Noblemen of Crossout in case we're up against a flip focused deck, and the Skull Lair as I mentioned. We're also playing an extra deck, but it's very unlikely to come up. And that's going to do it for the deck. I know this deck is not perfect. No matter what build I put for water here, people would have issues with it. I know that for a fact because I tried coming up with various water builds in preparation for this video, and no matter what I went with, it was always somewhat unoptimal in one category or another. So I definitely think that this deck can be tinkered with more and optimized more, and there are a couple different directions you can go with it. You could stock up on more Umirukas, you could instead focus more on the Aqua Spirit aspect or the Catapult Turtle aspect, but I kind of went for a best of all possible worlds thing with this sort of deck. Maybe it paid off, maybe it didn't. We'll have to find out in the game, so let's dive into those now. Okay, we've got a game against Clemens12, who's appeared on the channel in the past for Android, so happy to have them on again. We are playing Water, unclear what they're playing, but let's find out. They will win the Rock, Paper, Scissors here, so they will be able to go first. And we are going to go second here. This is a pretty decent opener, not going to lie. We've got Grizzly and Revival Jam, both of which can serve as a Jinzo later on, so we feel pretty good about that. They're just going to set 2 and pass back to us. And I think what we got to do here is we just got to set the Mother Grizzly and pass back to them. We could go aggressive with the Kaiku, but not knowing what their back row is can be pretty bad, especially if it's like a trap hole and they get in for a ton of damage next turn. Especially given we don't have any back row to really set. We could set the Raigeki here, but if they do use Spell and Trap removal on it, then we've lost out on a very powerful card. So I do think it's best just to go for the Grizzly play here. We can always go for a Kaiku next turn if we want to, or just go for Jinzo. So we feel pretty good about this. In the end phase, they're going to fire a Jar of Greed here, get that extra draw, which is a bit unfortunate for us. They're going to tribute over that Witch for a Jinzo of their own. They're going to grab a Gemini Elf off the Witch. They're going to attack in to our Mother Grizzly here, and that's perfectly fine by us. We'll just bring out another Mother Grizzly, and we'll pass back to them. We draw a Witch of our own, and we could just fire Raigeki here and get in for some major damage with Mother Grizzly and Kaiku. That might be the way to do it, but it does play a bit badly into board clears, and we do know about the Elf, which can clear the Kaiku. So I think what we want to do is we want to save the Raigeki for once they've committed the Elf to board, and we're just going to set this Witch and pass back to them. They're going to bring out this Gemini Elf here, attack into the Grizzly. We'll get out another Grizzly from deck, and they're going to attack into that with the Jinzo. Given that the last water target we can bring out in deck is the Catapult Turtle here, we're just going to bring that out and pass back to them. We draw Gemini Elf, and unfortunately, no matter how we slice it here, we don't have enough for lethal damage. The Catapult Turtle could make that a potential possibility, but we could just get in 4,000 with our monsters, and then if we tribute it off our entire board, that would just be 2,000. So we wouldn't quite be able to kill them. It might still be worth doing to get them down to a very low life point total, but I don't really think it's worth it right now. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a bit more of a conservative play here. And we are going to tribute off the Witch with the Catapult Turtle, search out a Bazoo, and then summon that out to hit over the Jinzo. We're going to banish 3 from our graveyard, and we're actually going to banish the 3 Grizzlies, which may seem weird, as we do want Waters in grave for Aqua Spirit if we do draw it. But I figure that if they clear the Catapult Turtle, we'll have a Water in grave either way, and if we do want to clear the Catapult Turtle ourselves, we can just tribute it off for its effect. So I think this is the right play to do. We're going to attack into that Jinzo, clear that, and then we're going to pass back to them. We feel pretty good about this. We've saved our Raigeki for later, which I do think is worth doing. And we've got a pretty formidable board. They're going to fire Dark Hole, though, so that will clear our board. But they also clear their Elf, which is pretty nice. They're going to attack in with the Kaiku here, unfortunately, so they will be able to get rid of that Catapult Turtle in our graveyard. They'll set 1 pass back to us. Luckily, we've got Gemini Elf to deal with the Kaiku. It looks like they don't have a trap hole for that. We're going to attack into the Kaiku there, clear that, and then we can set the Torrential and pass back to them. They're going to fire another Jar of Greed, getting another draw here. And they're going to bring out Zambira. Zambira will contest the Elf. We could fire Torrential Tribute here, but I don't really see a point to doing that. Zambira can't attack directly, and so they need to bring out another monster if they want to get aggressive on us. So I feel like it's fine just saving the Torrential for later. They're going to attack in to the Elf. We'll take 200 there. Zambira will drop down to 1900 attack, and they're going to fire a Confiscation. So they will be able to hit the Raigeki out of our hand, which is a little bit unfortunate. We were hoping to save that for later. Maybe we should set the Raigeki to play around the hand rips, but I figured this is probably fine. We still got the Torrential on field, so we're feeling okay about that. And we'll just set this Revival Jam pass back to them. We could potentially Torrential the board if they summon out another monster, then get in with Kaiku next turn. They're going to bring out Bazoo, and I think we do actually want to Torrential the board here, as the reason we wouldn't Torrential would be to tribute over the Revival Jam next turn for Jinzo, but Bazoo does just out Jinzo on its own, so we do have to fire the Torrential here. And they're going to set 1 pass back to us. We draw a Confiscation, which is pretty good. We'll summon out this Kaiku and try and get in for 18. Unfortunately, they do have a Mirror Force, so we'll have to fire a Confiscation, main phase 2, see what they've got. They've got Change of Heart, Cyberjar, and Painful Choice, all of which are pretty rough for us when we're at 4,000 life points. I think we do want to hit the Change of Heart out of hand, as that can enable them to get way more aggressive, which we don't really want given we're at 4,000 life points. The Painful Choice can also get them something good from their deck, but I feel like since we have some control over what they add with Painful, it's better to let them keep that. And, you know, Cyberjar kind of cuts both ways, so I feel like Change of Heart's probably the best hit here. So we're going to pass back to them. They're going to fire Pot of Greed, which is a pretty good draw. They're going to Forceful our hand, send back a Morphing Jar to the deck here. And they're going to fire a Painful Choice. Let's see what they choose to get. They're going to grab a Tomato, a Faith, a Heavy Storm, a Tomato, and a Call of the Haunted. Now, we don't want to let them get Call of the Haunted, as then they can just add back the Jinzo, which would be pretty bad for us. And if we let them get the Faith, they can get a Pot of Greed or a Change of Heart. So we definitely don't want them to get that. We could give them a Tomato, as we can hit over Tomato with the Kaiku. So that's not the worst thing in the world. But I honestly feel like since we have no back row in hand, the Heavy is a pretty safe bet here. Maybe this was a misplay. Maybe I should have given them the Tomato in case we drew back row later. But I think this is ultimately fine. So we're going to give them the Heavy, deprive them of monsters here, and hopefully we can just attack into the Cyberjar next turn. They're going to set what is likely the Cyberjar, and we draw an Umiruka, which is a bit unfortunate given that we've gone through most of our waters here. We're going to bring out a Kaiku and attack into their set. It is indeed the Cyberjar. So they're going to banish 5 off that, and those are 5 pretty good ones. We do know about the Nobleman, which is a bit unfortunate. So we could potentially just summon the Faith in attack position. But with the Painful, they can potentially give us ways to play around the Nobleman here. So I think it's ultimately fine. It is unfortunate because we drew a bit more back row, playing into Heavy Storm. So it's a bit rough, but I think ultimately this is fine. So they're going to set both of their monsters here. Add a Skull Lair, a Mystical Space Typhoon, and a Nobleman of Crossout to hand. And we are going to add, well, first we're going to special summon out the Magician of Faith, then add the MST, the Torrential, the Mirror Force, and the Painful here. We'll set that, and then main 2, we're going to fire this Painful. We're going to bring out the Hand Rips, so Forceful and Duo, as those can potentially snipe the Heavy Storm out of hand and enable us to set back row, or snipe the Nobleman of Crossout and enable us to get back a powerful spell from Grave. We're also going to bring out Imperial Order, as that will stop the Nobleman, the Heavy Storm, etc. And we got to think about the last one, as I think these are the only 4 cards that really do deal with the board as is. The Dark Hole is a bit unfortunate here, but if we do get it to hand, we can clear their Tomato and Sangan, which they'll be able to search another monster to hand, but ultimately that's okay. It's just clearing away their monsters and also depriving them of cards in deck, because we could potentially win through deck out here. We're going to choose a Pot of Greed as our last one, because Pot of Greed is an incredibly powerful card, and so they'll be disincentivized to give us that. And even if they do give us that, then we could potentially draw something else good here. They're going to give us the Forceful, which is interesting. A bit worrying, actually, that they do that, but we're going to fire the Forceful and see what they've got, and it becomes clear why they do that given their hand. So normally we would Forceful back something like the Nobleman, but given that they've got Raigeki, that's a bit less good, as they have a way to deal with the Magician of Faith either way. So I think what we actually have to do here is send back the Heavy Storm and just set our back row, because our back row is incredibly strong and can deal with their board. It's just a little bit unfortunate. They do have the Mystical Space Typhoon to clear one of our back row, but I think ultimately we do have to go with the Heavy Storm here. So we're going to think a long time about this, but we are going to choose the Heavy, and we'll just have to play through the Nobleman and Raigeki, which is a bit unfortunate, but it is what it is. We're going to pass back to them. They're going to fire Mystical Space Typhoon on one of our back row. They're going to hit the Torrential, and they're going to Nobleman our Magician of Faith here. So they'll banish a Magician from their deck as well, flip up the Sangan and Tomato here, and they're going to try and get in for 2,400 damage. Now, we could potentially just take this and, you know, hope to get something good next turn. But I do think that I do have to Mirror Force here, as we are at very low life points. and this would drop us down incredibly low. So we do have 2 Mirror Force. Looks like they don't have any targets for Sangan left in the deck, so this actually turned into a pretty profitable Mirror Force for us. They're going to set 2, pass back to us. We draw another Umiruka, which this is why I'm really not a fan of the card, because you really do have to draw it with your water monsters for it to be good. And if you're in top deck mode at the end of the game, it's a really bad draw. So it's very unfortunate that that's what we got. We'll just set this Mystical Space Typhoon, pass back to them. They're going to bring up Bazoo, which is probably one of the best draws they could get here, as now they've got us on a 2-turn clock. Given that they've got Raigeki, it's very unlikely that we'll be able to carve our way out of this. But let's see what happens. We're going to draw Cyberjar, which would be really good in pretty much any other circumstance, but with the Raigeki, they can just clear it, and they do indeed do that, so that will be the end of the game. So I hope that that game showed why I'm not the biggest fan of the Umiruka element of the deck, and I actually think the water deck is better without Umiruka. So for games 2 and 3, I do side out of the Umiruka, as it's just a bit too win more in my opinion, as you kind of already have to have your water monsters ready to go in order for this to be good. And if you're in a tough spot and you really need a good draw to get you out of it, Umiruka is not that. So I swap out the Umirukas, I believe, for a Bazoo and a Kaiku in games 2 and 3. So let's see how that works for us. So we will be going first here, as we did lose the last game. And this is a pretty good opening hand. The Raigeki and Dark Hole are just insane. We're going to summon out that Gemini Elf, and we could have set the Call of the Haunted as a bluff potentially, or if they cleared the Elf, we could bring it back. But we want to save the Call of the Haunted for when our Jinzo's in grave, as that way if they do blind MST the back row, then we can bring back Jinzo off it and get some value. So they're going to fire Pot of Greed, then fire Forceful. We'll send back the Raigeki, which is a bit unfortunate, but it makes sense. And they're going to set 2 and pass back to us. We've got Imperial Order, which is okay. We're going to think about exactly what to do here, and we're just going to tribute the Elf for a Jinzo. They're going to think about this for a bit, and they are indeed going to Solemn Judgment this. That is pretty insane here, but I do get why they do it. Jinzo's really hard to get around otherwise, so it makes sense just to get it off the board as soon as possible. We're just going to set an Imperial Order and a Call of the Haunted, pass back to them. We feel very good about this, as we can just call back the Jinzo if they try and MST it, or Heavy Storm here. And we can always just Imperial Order the Heavy Storm either way. They're going to flip up a Magician of Faith here and grab back probably a Pot of Greed. Yep, they're going to grab back that Pot of Greed there. They're going to fire the Pot of Greed. We've got Imperial Order for that, but unfortunately they do have the Mystical Space Typhoon for our Imperial Order, so they will get to draw 2. I'm still feeling pretty good about this situation because we do have Dark Hole to clear the board. They've got Painful Choice, so they're going to send 5 there. They send a Reborn, a Duo, an Imperial Order, a Mirror Force, and a Jinzo. I think of these, we want to give them the Jinzo. Yeah, this does shut off their back row slightly, and we do have ways to clear it with things like Dark Hole. So I think this is ultimately fine. We're going to give them the Jinzo. They're going to tribute that out, and they're going to attack in for 2,400. We'll take the 24, and they're going to pass back to us. We draw a Gemini Elf, which is very nice. We'll just Dark Hole that Jinzo away, call the Haunted back, a Jinzo of our own, and summon out Kaiku and attack in for lethal damage here. So, after the game concluded, they revealed that they did indeed have a Solemn Judgment, and they forgot to set it, which is a bit unfortunate for them. But I think either way we were going to win this game, as they would have had to Solemn the Call of the Haunted, as that would have shut off their Solemn. And if they had done that, then we would have gotten in for, I mean, we would have likely brought out the Elf. Maybe we just bring out the Kaiku to get rid of the Jinzo. But either way, they would have been at very low life points. And let's see what their hand is. Yeah, I'm not sure this would have been too helpful, especially if we had summoned out Kaiku to get rid of their Jinzo. So I think that ultimately we would have won this game either way. But it is a bit unfortunate that we won it without seeing any of the water cards, as it would have been nice to show off what the jank part of the strategy can do. So we're going to go into game 3. I think I do actually side out the hand rips here for things like Fisher, as I do want more removal, given that game 1 I was really lacking in ways to deal with things like Bazoo in the end of the game, so I did want that extra removal. And given that we're going second, I feel like the hand rips are a bit less consistent there, but we'll have to see how it pays off for us. We are going to go second here indeed, And unfortunately, we draw a Fisher in the opener, which means that we would have drawn one of our hand rips right away. So maybe we're getting a bit punished for siding out of the hand rips. We're going to bring out this Gemini Elf attack into their set. It's a Sangan, so we'll be able to add a Witch, which again, we're getting a little bit punished for siding out of the hand rips, because we could just hand rip that out of their hand, potentially. We're going to pass back to them. They've got a Jar of Greed, so they'll be able to draw one, then draw another. They're going to bring out a Gemini Elf and Change of Heart our Gemini Elf to get in for 3,800 points of damage, which is a major, major blow. They're going to set one, pass back to us. We draw another Gemini Elf, which is pretty nice. We're going to bring out a Mother Grizzly, and unfortunately they do have a Torrential Tribute for that, which is ultimately okay. We could potentially Reborn here to just keep the aggressive pressure going, but I feel like we want to save Reborn for later. We do have a Call of the Haunted either way. In case they do bring out something like Kaiku, we can Call of the Haunted back something like Gemini Elf. It does die to Mystical Space Typhoon, but it also lets us do this play. They're going to fire a Reborn, target my Gemini Elf, so we're going to chain a Call of the Haunted to bring back that Elf and deprive them of a monster. They're going to Dark Hole that away, which is a little bit unfortunate, and then they're going to bring out another Elf of their own, attacking in for 1,900 here, passing back to us. We draw a Catapult Turtle, and we're going to bring out that Elf and Fisher away theirs. This may be a bit greedy, as I can just crash my Elf into their Elf to clear it that way. But the reason I did this was because I felt like I could keep up the aggressive pressure going here, and with Reborn, I feel like I can make major aggressive plays here. So I am going to fire the Reborn, go for the Grizzly. Maybe this is not the right choice, given that I've got a Jam and a Turtle in hand, and I could have just brought back the other Elf to get in for even more damage. But I think ultimately this is fine. Grizzly replaces itself, so it's not the worst thing in the world. And we're just going to pass back to them. They're going to set one, activate Swords, and pass back to us, and that's really unfortunate for us. Luckily, the Raigeki is a pretty good draw here, but that Swords is going to prevent us from keeping the aggressive pressure going, which we really wanted to do. They're going to summon out a Bazoo here, banish 3, and attack into Elf, dealing 600 damage. So we're down to a very low life point total here, which is a bit worrying, but Torrential is a pretty good draw. We're going to set this Revival Jam, set the Torrential, and pass back to them. The reason we don't fire Raigeki here is that we do know about the Witch, and we figure that is likely what they have set. So we want to save Raigeki for later. Maybe this was a little bit of a mistake, but it is what we did, and I think it's fine. We've got Torrential to protect ourselves even more, and I don't think they can kill us this turn. So they're going to bring out Gemini Elf, and we could potentially fire Torrential here, but we don't necessarily want to do that. We want to save that for later, when we could potentially protect ourselves from damage. And since we're not going to die here, I feel fine about this. We're going to bring out a Grizzly off of the Grizzly. They're going to attack into that with the Bazoo for 1,100. And now if we did bring out another Grizzly here, we'd be in a really tough spot, as if they do have Cannon Soldier in the deck, if we cleared the Witch, then we would just lose the game, basically, because they could add Cannon Soldier to hand, and then Prio Tribute it next turn. So we're actually going to just not do anything with Grizzly's effect, and we're going to let this Jam die to the Elf. We don't have the 1,000 to pay for the Revival Jam effect, which is a little bit unfortunate, but we do have this Raigeki to clear their board. They're going to grab a Bazoo, and we could potentially hold on to the Aqua Spirit in hand, given that, we do have the Torrential Tribute set, but I want to play it a little bit safe in case they do have Spell and Trap removal, so we will just banish this Revival Jam to bring out the Spirit in defense mode and pass back to them. This is a little bit risky, as, if we are forced to Torrential their board, then we do lose one of our big monsters here. But I do think it is good to do, as they haven't really used up any Spell and Trap removal before this point. So I feel like it's very likely that they have some in hand, or they can draw into it. So I do want to just hedge my bets here. Maybe it's playing a little bit too cautiously. And they summon out a Tomato, which is very unfortunate for us, as that will be able to clear of the Aqua Spirit. But I did have to summon the Aqua Spirit in defense, as if they summoned it in attack and they did have Spell and Trap removal, then they could get in for lethal damage with Bazoo. So we're getting a little bit punished for this play, but I do think it was the right choice. We could potentially draw into something to clear the Tomato next turn, and Mirror Force will potentially do that. We'll set that pass back to them. and they're going to just attack in with the tomato. Makes sense. We've got the Mirror Force for that, but unfortunately they've got a Solemn Judgment, so that will just be the end of the game. So I think that these games do show off some of the flaws with the water strategy. Again, I don't think that my build of this deck is potentially optimal, but I do think that it is pretty decent, and it does highlight why you'd want to play this deck, using the free special summons off of Aqua Spirit, the recursion of Revival Jam, and the potential damage push at the end with Catapult Turtle. I do think that the Umirukas are kind of cope. I do know that Umiruka did take a game off of me in one of my past videos, but again, I find it really fragile, and unless everything goes right for you, it's just really bad and can lose you games that you otherwise could have won, like that game 1 here. But I do know that there are a lot of different opinions on this deck, and playing with it, I don't actually think it's that bad. I know I did lose the 2 games that the water elements really came up here. But I do think that they do have the potential to make for big pushes, and they can be a bit difficult for your opponent to deal with. That being said, let me know your thoughts on this deck down in the comments below. Am I overselling this a bit? Is water just completely trashed here? Or do you think that I'm actually underselling it, and that with a better build, this deck could potentially rise to tier 1? My own opinions on the deck are that it's probably tier 2 and will probably stay there. But I could definitely see improvements being made in the future that could raise it up a little bit. But let me know all your thoughts down in the comments below. I look forward to talking with you as always. And until next time, I've been Ben from YGO from Zero, and I'm signing off.